So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We are gonna start now our talk by Professor Brad Templeton, who kindly accepted the invitation to meet us today. This talk is part of the partnership of the Institute of Computing here at the University of Campinas, São Paulo, and the Pontifical University, Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, PUC-Rio. We created this connection called Connection Rio Campinas to foster discussions in science and technology. And we are very happy to have here today Professor Brad Templeton to talk to us. Brad proposed this discussion on computerized revolution in transport, self-driving cars, flying cars, and the change to cities. He is the founder of ClariNet, the world's first.com, if I'm not mistaken, around 1989. He's a founding Singularity expert and chair of Computing and Networks for Singularity University, chairman Emeritus of Electronic Frontier Foundation, leading speaker and consulting on self-driving cars, and member of the early Google self-driving team, which is now today called Waymo. He's the director of Foresight Institute, Nanotechnology, and Futurist, software package author, advisor, and investor to many top mobility companies, including delivery robots, cars, scooters, shuttles, mini cars, and VTOL aircraft. So thank you very much, Brad, once again for accepting our invitation to talk to us today. The stage is all yours, and I will stop sharing now. I will also ask the audience to please keep your cameras open when we have the discussions, okay? And I will remove myself from Spotlight right now.
Very good. And yes, so what I'll do is I'll switch over to giving you the slides. And we'll begin our talk about the amazing things that are going to happen to the world because of self-driving cars. And it's really quite dramatic. I'm going to get into some of those numbers for you. So many aspects of life are linked to transportation and cars, and so they will all change as computers take them over. So this comes about because we're going to bring Moore's law to transportation. I hope most of you have heard of Moore's law and know a bit about it. The principle, not really a law, that has said that computers get twice as good about every 1 or 2 years. That's been going on for 50 years, and it's been changing every industry. You've seen music and photography and everything else changed, and we do them all on our phones now. And likewise, we're going to see this happen with cars. So do mute yourself if you're right now during this period. We can have some open conversation later. So Moore's law is going to come to transportation, and it's going to change a lot of things. But the reason that many people got into this was to save lives. And we can do this because, well, human beings, we're not very good drivers. And every year around the world, we kill a staggering number of people. 1.35 million people are killed every year in car accidents around the world. Now, I work in the United States. In 2020, 38,680 people were killed in car accidents. But another telling number calculated by the American Transport Safety Agency is that the cost of accidents in that country was $870 billion US. That's about 9% of the GDP, and works out to about 29 cents a mile or 16 euro cents a kilometer, more than the cost of the gasoline, petrol, benzene, whatever you like to call it, petrola. What's the Portuguese word for it? Anyway, someone will tell me that. Yeah, so it's just astonishing to think about how much the cost of accidents is. Now, down in Brazil, we had 43,698 dead, so that's more than the United States. And in fact, it's 4 times the rate of the United States per car, because Americans own a lot of cars. So that should stagger you right away, but there is the potential to get rid of many of those deaths. Now, right away, 40% of all the road fatalities involve drinking, and robots very rarely drink. This is a famous Mexicano robot that maybe drinks a beer from time to time, but otherwise they don't. And there we have the great potential for improvement. In many cities, especially in the United States, which is so car focused, It's been calculated that more than 60% of the land belongs to cars. This is a map of Houston in Texas. And you can see they've marked all the roads, driveways, or actually haven't marked the roads, but the parking lots, the driveways, and the roads all together account for more than half of the land in some cities given over to the car. My calculation is that the global ground transportation industry is about 5 trillion American dollars every year, which is it's about the third largest industry in the world, all up for grabs as, again, the computer starts to take it over. I also calculated for the United States, it'd be a little less for Brazil, that Americans spend every year about 50 billion hours doing this. 50 billion hours turning steering wheels. To put that in perspective, the labor output, the productive labor output of the United States is 240 billion hours of labor. So almost a quarter of that spent in turning steering wheels, something that we can get computers to do for us. This all puts out about 8 billion tons of carbon dioxide. In fact, about 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the major industrial countries comes from driving. And a number I calculated that is quite amazing is that every year the entire human race is driving about 1.7 light years. Now, do any of you use light years in your work as a unit of human activity? Did you even imagine the light year could be a unit of human activity? And yet it is. That's how big driving is. That's how big the game is that's about to be turned upside down. And because of these big numbers, everybody's getting involved. All the car companies, all the big tech companies, the startups, the governments, you name it. They want to be in here. They want to have a piece of the pie. They want to have control over it. And almost everyone has a project. I'm not going to tell you about all of them, but I'll start actually with the car companies. And this is, an example of a Mercedes Daimler car with a person not holding the wheel, or a car you see in the bottom right corner, which has no wheel at all. The interesting thing about these guys is they all got very heavily into it, and they've all backed off a bit. They've slowed down. They've said, this is not going to happen anytime soon. We're going to focus on driver assist, where you have to watch the car while it drives, but it does some stuff. And they have been moving that direction. That is not true, though, of the tech companies and the startups. Now, one company that's halfway a car company and also a tech company is Tesla. Now, Tesla doesn't yet make a self-driving car. They sometimes say they do, but it is interesting that Tesla owners discovered now 5 or 6 years ago, they woke up one morning and discovered their cars now had this autopilot function, which isn't self-driving, but does keep the car in the center lane and at the right speed while you watch. And this was just something that showed up new in their car one morning. That's something that the car industry gets a little scared of, the idea that a car could get a major new feature just because some software was downloaded to it. And many, many people, I have this car myself. There are, of course, tons and tons of people buying them and using these systems. Sometimes they think it is a self-driving car, leading to tragic results like this. This is a road I drive myself very frequently, but one person was letting the system drive him. He wasn't paying attention to the road the way that it is supposed to require you to do, and we had this terrible result. Because of that, people argue politically about whether this is the way to do things, but nonetheless, Tesla is very aggressive and hopes they're going to get towards self-driving someday. Many people are doubtful. In fact, they even now have in beta test in the United States something they call their full self-driving product. And it isn't, again, it's a product you have to watch and hold the wheel and get ready to take over if it makes a mistake, and it does often make mistakes. But there are now people out there, ordinary customers on the road, trying out and testing this product, and it works on all the city streets. It doesn't just work on the highways the way the old system did. Another car company that's heavily involved but may have a problem is this one, which may have difficulty saying, trust your life to our software. Why would we lie to you, right? We would never lie. The funny thing is that scandal obviously was bad for the company in many ways, but it forced them to rethink their company. It's made them move more quickly into electric cars than they would have otherwise. It's made them move into all sorts of changes in their company that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't gone through the scandal. Never waste a good crisis, as is often said. Now, I think a lot of the action is in the startups, and there are hundreds of startups, and these are just a few. And in fact, most of these have reached this thing called unicorn status, which used to mean very rare. Now it's pretty popular. A unicorn is a private company that's managed to be worth $1 billion in the markets or in the investor market. And so these companies are all out there. Some of them are now up to $10 billion in stock market value, or not stock market valuation, but private market valuation. And they all, of course, don't think like the car companies. They think like startups, and they're working at more radical and advanced paces. We also see a lot of people trying to do trucking because they think they can do trucking a bit earlier. It's a simpler problem. This company gone public to about a $5 billion valuation in spite of not yet having a product, not being able to actually send a truck out with nobody in it yet. But they are doing deliveries with human beings watching the truck do the driving. And there are efforts from big companies like Freightliner and from other companies, including Waymo, who we'll talk about, trying to make trucks work. We have seen one company start up that was one of the first unicorns, which trying to completely reinvent the car, not just make it self-driving, build something that doesn't look like old cars and isn't based on those the principles that that most people think of as a de rigueur for a car. This company called Zoox sold itself last year when the pandemic slowed things down to Amazon. And now at Amazon, it has, well, pretty much unlimited money. Oh, by the way, sorry, you're Brazilian. Amazon is a big computer store. I know that in Brazil, it's something else.
Oh, it's present here. It's also Amazon.
I know it is, but doesn't I just think that hopefully the river is still more famous in Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
Around here, if someone says Amazon, no one thinks of the river anymore. They'll think of the store, or they'll think of strong warrior women, but the river is third on the list. I hate to tell you this. However, Amazon has bought this company and intends to follow its mission of making taxi cars, but also everyone suspects that Amazon also wants to use this technology to do their deliveries, because they've become one of the world's largest delivery companies in the process of becoming the world's biggest store. This is I photographed this out of my car. This is one of the test cars of Apple Computer. They don't have any logo on them. Apple is very secretive. They have definitely got a big project going underway. They've been doing it for several years, but they don't tell anyone about what they're doing, why they're doing it. I have learned one secret thing about the Apple car, which is it will only work if you get the latest iPhone. So make sure to get that before you buy this. Okay, that's a joke, but you never know. It might actually turn out to be true. And a startup called Cruise was bought by General Motors, and they got a lot of money that way. And they're also trying to build a thing that doesn't look like a traditional car. And they have a contract to deploy these as self-driving shuttles starting next year in the United Arab Emirates. This is Dubai. And also they'll be doing it in their hometown of San Francisco. And they have Honda investing in them, as well as General Motors. This is one of the few cases of a big car company still being very active, because they deliberately bought it as a startup and let that run as an independent company rather than being run by the rules of a car company. And these non-car companies are interested in changing the auto industry to being about selling rides rather than selling cars. So, of course, the car industry is about selling cars, but many people believe the auto industry of the future will be about selling the ride, and basically what Uber does, or companies like it. This is an interesting commercial position, because if you sell the ride, you sell everything. You sell the vehicle for 20 minutes, you sell the fuel, you sell the maintenance, the insurance, the entire value chain of automotive is sold by you, which is a nice place to be. Now, of course, Uber is the #1 brand, or maybe some people would say that Didi in China is, but they're the biggest brands in selling rides. They had self-driving projects. This is a photo of their project before they sold it to, or merged it with, one of those startups. But it is very important to understand this difference in terms of thinking about it, about making a business selling rides instead of a business selling cars. There's lots of action in China as well. So, for example, there are 3 companies in China now running pilot projects where self-driving taxis, selling rides instead of cars, are driving around in limited areas. This is AutoX, a company in Shenzhen. And there's also Baidu, which is the sort of the Google of China, search engine of China, running some cars around an area of Beijing where the Winter Olympics will be. Actually, they're going to run them during the Olympics. And a couple of other Chinese companies now doing action, trying to maybe see if this can happen earlier in China. This is Baidu's car on display with the sensors and so on it. But the leader in this space is the team that I worked on. It's not because I worked on it, but I was there at the beginning, which was Google. It was a part of Google. It's now split out as a company called Waymo, and they have driven more than 30 million kilometers in their vehicles, self-driving, in a variety of towns, mostly simple driving situations, but no one else is anywhere close to that 30 million kilometers. They've also done actually far more, but probably 40, 50 billion kilometers in simulator, so they can test their car in all sorts of unusual situations. This is their first car. This is an old picture taken near Singularity University that was mentioned earlier on today. But since then, they have moved on, and they have been running now for several years a live taxi service in the suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, in the United States, beginning with just a select set of families. But today, this service runs around these suburbs. Anyone in the public can use it. You just download an app to your phone, exactly like you would use Uber, Lyft, any of these other services. You summon it, and during the pandemic, it sort of ended now, but during the pandemic, it always showed up with nobody inside. The cars were running around the streets with nobody inside. You got in, you were on your own, so you didn't have to, worry about the virus, and taking the places. And this service has been there, and they've done around 6 million miles in suburban Phoenix without ever being at fault in an accident. So that's about 8 to 10 human lifetimes of driving that they have driven without ever having made that sort of mistake, which is pretty good. It's better than a human being in terms of how safe it is. It still has some bugs to iron out, but nonetheless, this is going on. If you're asking when does it happen, it's already happened depending on where you are. This is their latest version, which is based on a Jaguar electric car, more luxury car. And this is running around San Francisco right now. They don't have them run empty right now. They still have a human being watching it, but not touching the wheel. And it's more complex driving than you find in suburban Phoenix. It's much less complex than you'd find in Sao Paulo, of course, but nonetheless, it's a step towards driving in more complex areas. Now, the difference, though, comes from the difference in the cultures of these companies. If you look at car companies like BMW, Mercedes, they view this problem as taking a car, and they know how to make cars. They're very good at making cars, and putting a computer in it and improving it and giving it some driving ability. But I think the tech companies like Google and Waymo think of this as taking a computer, which they know all about, and putting it in the car to see what happens. Now, those are two approaches to the same goal, the same result, but the high-tech approach is a much faster approach and is, I think, thus likely to win. So what do we get when we put this together? You get the ability to, much like Uber, pick up your phone, summon a vehicle, it comes right to you. It's got a nice, pleasant environment. Maybe the seats face each other. You have a conversation. You can work, you can watch movies. You can do what you do in the back of an Uber, mostly stare at your phone. But whatever it is you want to do, you can do it. And it gets you where you want to go without taking time from your day. It doesn't need any central control. It doesn't need any new infrastructure, any new roads, any new tracks. It just does that. So once you've built something like that, which I like to call mobility on demand, you get 4 things done for you. Now, 1, it drives you around more safely. It delivers cars to you. So cars become this cloud of machines which wander the city and can be delivered to you wherever you are, particularly the right vehicle. The vehicles also refuel or recharge themselves, more likely to be recharged, as I'll get into in a minute. And the vehicles also park or store themselves. So the result of that is pretty dramatic for not just transportation, but for other industries too, like energy. Now, we consume a lot. As I said, 25% of the energy of industrial countries is going into transportation. So it's a pretty big part of the energy and climate change equation. Today, we buy cars in car dealerships. So we go to the car dealership and we ask, what car do I need for my life? We go in and we want a car that's going to meet all of our needs. If we go out to ski, maybe not in Brazil so much, but if we go out into the mountains, even a few times a year, we like to buy a big SUV like this, and these sell more than regular cars in the United States. because we want the car that's going to meet all our needs, even though most of the time, most of the trips, 80% of the trips we take, how many people are in the car? Not 5, which you have seats for, but just 1. And the trip is usually short and across town. So when you sell rides instead of cars, you change this equation. You're not going to a car dealer to figure out what car you need for 5 years. You're asking, what car do I need today? What car do I need right now for the trip? And again, 80% of trips, that doesn't have to be a big 5-seat car. That can be a car like this one here I'm working on, which is half the width of a regular car, carries 1 to 2 people, doesn't use much energy at all compared to the regular car. And so when you want to get 4 friends together and go to the mountains, of course, you get the SUV and you use it when you need it. And when you need to go and get something big at the store, maybe you get the minivan. But when it's just you or 2 people, maybe you get something a lot smaller that doesn't clog up the roads and does a lot of other nice things. So that changes the equation of how transportation works. It changes the price. It changes the energy output. It's actually greener, not just than today's cars, but even than public transit. Now, I mentioned about recharging. So when you have vehicles like this, it makes it even easier to switch to electric cars. Now, by the way, the switch to electric cars is going to happen anyway. For a while, people were wondering what it would happen, but it's very clearly, I've owned one for a few years. I would not go back to a gasoline car for almost any usage. Maybe a long road trip across, deep country, maybe I'd still think of a gasoline car, but otherwise electric car all the way. But when it comes to cars on demand, when you sell rides, you don't even care what's under the hood of the car that comes to you. You don't care. You don't ask your taxi driver what type of fuel is in the car. That's only what the fleet manager cares about and has a spreadsheet to care about, or maybe government policy dictates it. And for that, the answer is very definitely electric. It's got so many nice wins. So this facilitates that move. No one has to worry about range. Nobody has to worry about recharging. It's all done by the vehicles. It's done by the fleet. And so that means we could severely reduce the amount of oil so you can sell your Petrobras. Now, a brief technical look. This is the view from a Lidar sensor, which is the main sensor most of these cars use. This is an older one, actually. The views are better and more high resolution today. But the trick about a Lidar sensor is it is 3D. It is true 3D. It's not like we have 2 eyes and we try and figure out what the world is like in 3D. It really knows exactly how far away everything is. And so it never makes mistakes about, is there something in front of me or not? As you can see, the little trees and cars and other things you see in this picture are a little fuzzy, but it's good enough to make it happen. And this is the sensor that revolutionized and made these things possible, and which everyone except for Tesla and a few other people believes is going to be the answer to make this happen. So this predicts a different most common car of the future. There we talk about having a car that's where most of them, not all of them, are small. They're electric. They probably have only a few hundred parts. I don't know if you know this, but the typical cars that we buy today, they have 10,000 parts or more in them. It's actually amazing you can buy them for the price you do, because that's the result of a lot of work and a lot of volume. It may not have a dashboard at all compared to the big, fancy, expensive dashboard you see in a car today. We'll actually have a lot of them because we'll be doing a lot of riding in them, but we'll have lots of different types. So there'll be little ones, there'll be bigger ones, there'll be ones that you sleep in, there'll be ones for vans for taking 15 people, all sorts of different types, and that you'll always get the right vehicle for the trip. This predicts winners and losers. The winners will be the people who follow this new model. They sell rides, they make or the components for these new kinds of cars or make these components, the people who write the software, build the sensors, the people who work on electric cars, and the people who think about fleets. And the losers will be the old world, the people who still think about selling cars that use gasoline, petrola, the people who are car dealers, the people who write insurance for these cars, the people who loan you money to buy these cars. All of these things will eventually see real trouble into the future and have to rethink their businesses. Now, we've been talking about cars now for a little while. Let's actually leave the ground. Up on the left there is Sebastian Thrun. Sebastian is the man who got me into self-driving cars when I met him in about 2005. And that's when he won the first person to win the big contest that the American military had for small teams to build self-driving cars. He went from that, though, to being the head of the Stanford AI lab and then the founder of Google X and the Google self-driving project. So many people consider him sort of the modern father of the technology. And guess what? He doesn't do it anymore. He decided, nah, I don't want to do self-driving cars anymore. That's too boring. And now this is what he's building. This is one of the vehicles he's worked on. It is a electric vertical takeoff airplane. Now, I'm sure you've heard people talk about what they call a flying car, and you know, it's something that people have predicted for decades and decades. It hasn't shown up. Well, the new technologies today have actually solved the engineering problems. There are still a few things to solve, and there are social problems and traffic control problems and noise problems, but these things are real and they actually fly. This is his, and you can see what it's got a propeller at the back, and it also has a little horizontal propellers like a drone, you know, like a drone which has 8 propellers. This one has 12 propellers. This is another design. It looks a little bit similar. This one is from Airbus, the big automotive manufacturer. Similar kind of thing. With this case, the wings tilt so that all the drone propellers can become forward propellers. So I'll show you a video of an even more radical design, which is out there and actually flying. It's not quite for sale, but they think they're going to put it for sale pretty soon. So as you may have seen, that vehicle took off vertically like a drone, but it then has tilted itself forward. So all its propellers are pushing it forward, and now it has 2 wings that it flies on like a conventional aircraft. And that allows it to be as efficient as a conventional aircraft, but take off anywhere and land anywhere like a drone. They say they're going to sell this one for the price of an SUV. There are many other designs. There are probably 300 companies that are out working on these one way or another. They present a whole new third dimension to how people will get around. And they're surprisingly efficient, and they're much quieter than helicopters, although they're still a bit noisy for everyday operation, in the sense that you don't necessarily want your neighbor to take off from your neighbor's backyard, even though I want to take off from my backyard, of course. So that may come, and I've seen particular interest actually in Brazil, because I've heard you have a little bit of traffic in Sao Paulo sometimes. Does it occasionally gets congested? You know, just a little bit, yeah. In fact, Sao Paulo is one of the few cities in the world where helicopters are a regular business, just because people who have money have given up on trying to drive, you know, through the city. And it might be interesting to see what happens in a city like Sao Paulo when you can get vehicles like this at a low cost. You don't have to be rich, and they can start to fill the skies because computers fly them. But I think also all these technologies are going to make changes for public transportation, not just private transportation. Today, public transportation is based on the idea that we have big vehicles like buses and trains. We have drivers in them because we have no choice today. They drive on a fixed route. You know, there's always, the bus just always takes the same route to the same stops. It drives on a fixed schedule. Sometimes the schedule is not so fixed, but it's supposed to be fixed. And it runs often on a private right-of-way. Subways always run in a private right-of-way. Buses don't. And it's run by the city, by the government, and subsidized by the government. And tomorrow we don't need the drivers. And so we can switch to using smaller or medium-sized vehicles. They don't have to have routes. They don't have to have schedules. They can go on the public streets, and they'll be run both by the cities and by private companies. And you've seen a touch of this. It went away during the pandemic, but you've probably seen that services like Uber have done Uber Pool, a service where they can put multiple people together in the car who are all going the same way. So it turns out that it's actually more efficient when you have smaller vehicles of 8 to 15 people than you try and fit everybody into the same bus. Because when you put everybody in the same bus, there's too much inconvenience for everyone, because everyone now has to go the wrong time, the wrong place. The fewer people you put together, the closer you make it to what the people actually want, and they don't defect and go into cars. So I think public transit will also change a fair bit. This is my vision of it, where in fact you have single person cars which gather everyone together within a square kilometer to a place where they transfer into vans, and then they go the piece of the road trip they have in common in the van, and they get dispersed again at the other end. So everybody goes the trip that they had, but importantly, they were all sharing a van for most of the trip. So you gain all of the advantages. You get actually more advantages than traditional buses in terms of efficiency and use of road. So that's going to be nice. Another radical concept in transportation, we mentioned Tesla earlier on. I'm sure you all hear every day about Elon Musk. He certainly manages to get in the news one way or another. And he's not doing this, but he told people they should do it. And so many people have followed, trying to make things that go inside a tube where almost all the air has been evacuated out. If you do that, you can go very fast, very efficient. There's no friction with the air, very little friction with the air. And so this is not a solved engineering problem yet. But the promise it holds, at least most people talk about, is the ability to go at more than 1,000 kilometers an hour, faster than the airplanes, maybe even 1,500 kilometers an hour, and take people from between cities in extremely short times. I think actually what might be even more interesting is to go shorter distances, like 50 kilometers, and to do that in only 4 or 5 minutes, and thus to make it as though if you have a tube like this, you could be like you're downtown, because you can be downtown in 5 minutes, which is faster than the people who live just outside downtown can get there. I don't know if this is going to come out, but Elon Musk does have, this is a real thing. This is not a drawing of a tunneling company. He's got a machine that builds small tunnels. And he hopes that this machine will, because the tunnels are small, be much cheaper than the tunnels we build today. And that's clearly true, because with a tunnel, the amount of tunneling you have to do goes up with the square of the size of the tunnel, the radius of the tunnel. So if you have a 10-foot wide tunnel, it uses 1/4. You dig out 1/4 of the dirt of what a 20-foot wide tunnel would require. And so he wants to make small tunnels, put small vehicles in them, and thus make it eventually, he hopes, as much as 100 times cheaper to make tunnels, which also could have interesting solutions for traffic in certain Brazilian cities we were talking about. And that's when I'll get to cities, because cities are effectively defined by transportation. I'll even say that the purpose of a city is transportation. The purpose of a city is to be a short time from the things in your life. You want it to be quick to get to your friends, your job, where you shop, where you eat, where you go recreation. You want that to be short trip, so you want it to be close to you, so we live together. Yes, we share the sewer and we share the wires and a few other things, but mainly we just want to be close to things. We want to be able to get to things quickly. And the city has been changed with every new type of transportation. Cities were changed in the 18th century, in the 19th century, when the trolleys arrived. After the horse changed the city first, and then the trolleys changed the city. And in the 20th century, we all know that the city has been redefined by the car, and suburbs have been created, and all these other things have happened to cities because of the car. Well, as we change transportation again with all the technologies we're talking about here, we will change the city once again. And nobody can be sure in predicting for you what it will look like, but we can make some guesses. But the one guess that's certain is that it will be different. We don't know whether it's going to be more or less dense, whether it's going to have transit or this modern type of transit. All sorts of changes are possible. One change that will happen, I'm pretty confident about, is a change to parking, because a self-driving taxi doesn't actually park, right? It drops you off and picks up somebody else, or if it needs to, it just stands and waits. It's not actually blocking anything, because it can move if you need it to move. So it could park in front of a fire hydrant if you wanted it to, or a driveway. So we're not going to need a lot of these parking lots that have taken over so many of the cities. In fact, I have a dream that we turn the parking lots into parks. And I don't know if we're going to do that. We'll probably turn it into condominium towers. But if we turn it into parks, that'll be nice. But one thing is true, there's going to be a bonanza of new land to give new purposes in our cities when we get ready to need less and less parking. It's going to change the meaning of real estate, because I don't know how you say this in Portuguese, but there's a joke that American real estate people all say that the three things that define the value of real estate are the location, and the location. And when transportation changes, the meaning of distance changes, and the meaning of location changes. And that changes everything about real estate. So we're going to see some pretty dramatic changes to what is one of the world's other largest industries, aside from transportation, of course, which is real estate. I've been talking about moving people, but let me say that I don't know if this is true in Brazil, but in much of the world, there is one Italian product which is considered so vital to our economy, so important that no matter where you are, no matter when it is, you have to be able to get it in 30 minutes. And I don't know why we built this giant infrastructure to move pizzas in 30 minutes, but it is possible to make delivery robots. And I work with a company called Starship. It's in Estonia in Europe. And we make delivery robots, which are going to bring you anything in 30 minutes, not just a pizza. Here is an example of one of them. I stopped outside. It's raining, of course. We're in near London. And there's a person from the shop has taken a person's order and stuck it in the robot and pushes the button. And the robot on its own is going to go off and get onto the sidewalk and take that down to deliver it to that customer. And these robots do this almost entirely autonomously. They get human help very occasionally, and they do it very inexpensively. And as I said, they're going to bring you everything in 30 minutes, not just the pizza or food. And this is real. They have now made 1.5 million deliveries with these robots, paying customer deliveries. This is not just a show-off project anymore. And they have 500 robots now with this particular grocery store chain in the United Kingdom. So this is spreading slowly, and there are many other companies also trying to do delivery robots. But if you think about it, if you can get everything in a few minutes, maybe you don't even need to own a lot of things. Maybe you can just rent that fancy thing that you only need for half an hour and then send it back in a robot when time is done. So let me cover, we'll finish the formal part of this by looking at some of the big questions that remain in this field. So one of the questions is actually, why have the car companies pulled back? Well, up in the right above me, you can see a chart which is known as the Gartner hype cycle. Have you all heard about this chart? Some of you are nodding. Some of you are staring blankly and confused. Well, anyway, this research company has identified that almost every technology goes through a cycle where people get very excited about it. Sometimes it's not even real. They get excited about it. Sometimes it is real and they get even more excited. But pretty soon it's too much hype. And so it goes through a little trough of disappointment, disillusionment. People no longer, they start thinking it was all wrong. But in fact, if it is real, it gets out of that trough, it goes up and more slowly comes in to the point where it gets widespread and changes the world. And so all technologies go through this. And this is true of self-driving cars. And because there was all this hype and excitement especially in the latter part of the previous decade, there was a period of disappointment. And the car companies, they never wanted this to happen. They didn't want their industry to be turned over, to be disrupted, as the word is often used, by tech companies. They hated when they saw headlines in the newspaper saying, Google is the future of the car. Right? That was the last thing they wanted to see happen. They had to fight that. So they all got in very much, even though computers were not their thing. And so as soon as it was possible to imagine there was a winter and things were slowing down, they all said, no, we don't want to do it at this pace. Let's go back to what we were doing. But that didn't stop the tech companies. That didn't stop the other companies. They're still going full steam. They have not met their dates. If you take what's probably the world's most complex software project in history and you say you're going to get it done in 10 years and you're off by 2 years, if you think that's unusual, you've never worked in software before. So there are still some problems to be solved that are keeping people from deploying it on the roads. The biggest one, I think, by the way, is not just making it safe, because as I said, Waymo has, at least in the limited environment of that Phoenix suburb, made it safer than a human being. It's proving that you've done this, proving it to yourself, to your lawyers, and to the public, and maybe someday to the government. It's like a drug. You can find a pill, but then, they had the Moderna vaccine in February of last year, right, before the epidemic even begun. And I'm sure that if they'd had that vaccine, Mr. Bolsonaro would have insisted everyone in Brazil get it. But they waited 8 months before they decided they had proved it was safe enough. And 500,000 people in the US and 2-3 million people in the world and many people in Brazil died during those 8 months while we were trying to figure out and prove it was safe. And so the big problem is sometimes proving that it's safe, because people want to see that. Technologically, the problem that's still probably most challenging is predicting what others will do. So when you drive on the road, it turns out that a big part of it is trying to estimate what the other people on the road are going to do. Are they going to swerve left? Are they going to cross the road? What do the pedestrians want to do? What do the bicycles want to do? And you want to predict that well so you can drive well. And this is one of the things that human beings are still better than computers at doing. Computers are better at with lasers, they're better at perceiving the world and seeing how far everything away is. They're better at understanding the physics and planning and all these other things. They don't ever get distracted. They have many things they do better than humans, but they don't yet predict other humans, or predict not other humans, but predict humans the way the humans predict other humans. So the result is they still have to work and improve that. And the other thing that could help in that area is improving the sensing so that it's even faster, because if you can't predict very well, it's better to sense faster, and then you can react more quickly that way. So how are we doing on, is the translation still going? Yeah, it's still going.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. It doesn't move very often. It's different from the one I used last. All right. So the next question everybody asks me is when? When will I get this? And of course, I said it's already there for people in some towns in the world. And in fact, it won't happen in one place. But when people ask me when, I always say June 23rd of 2022 at 5 p.m. And the answer is, of course, nobody knows the exact date. It's when those safety challenges are solved, the proving it's safe challenge, when that is solved, and also in different cities. So nobody can, even with all the money of Google or Apple, you cannot deploy it in every city at once. It's going to come one city at a time as people test it, deploy it, make sure it works there, and then buy all the cars, which is expensive even for these rich companies, and make it work. So they are naturally starting in the cities which are easiest to drive in and which are most lucrative for them to drive in. So that's bad news in Brazil, because as we've been talking about, Brazilian cities are probably harder than other cities. And there hasn't been as much development there. And it's easier to drive in American suburbs or even in American downtowns like San Francisco. But there's a company in Israel called Mobileye, which has been working very hard at driving in Israel, which is one of the more chaotic places in the world. There are Indian companies like Mahindra that are and Tata, which are trying to make it work in the very chaotic and crazy driving of India. So I think Brazilians can hold hope that the challenging problem of a crazy road may still be solved. Now, as I mentioned, this has big changes for the automotive industry, but there's really many other industries which also see change. And this is just some of them. I talked, of course, about the car industry and a little bit about real estate and parking and insurance, but there are many more. We can talk about any of these: networking, oil, electricity, mining. I'll briefly mention, I talked about the resource industries, like this is coal, but electrical generation and gasoline production. These obviously change in big ways because, as I said, 25% of this energy goes into driving today. One thing you might not have thought of is medicine. 4 million visits to the emergency room from car accidents every year in the US, probably a similar number in Brazil based on the death numbers I put forward. And that's something that hopefully will take down quite a bit, changing the priorities and organizing a hospital and an emergency room. I talked to you a bit about retail. And in some parts of the world, retail still looks a lot like this, with individual booths and markets and so on. In other places, it's big box stores and stores like Amazon.com. But we're going to see even bigger changes to retail. Not all of them that we're going to like, by the way, but they're definitely coming. Construction will change because as real estate changes and what sort of buildings we want to live in change, that will change the companies that build them. And as I said, the nature of cities themselves is going to change. Do we build big high rises? Do we have more sprawl? Do we want to be close and dense to everything? We'll have many, many questions to answer about what the city of the future will look like. And so on top of that structure of cities, don't forget the ability to reduce our greenhouse gases by billions of tons of CO2, the ability to make or save trillions of dollars, and of course, the ability to save millions of lives. These are huge numbers, and that's why there are very smart people out there investing billions of dollars and lots of time. They're going to make it happen, and it's going to change the world. So, obrigado.
Very good, Brad. Thank you very much. Very nice presentation with some aspects to think about. How do you want to conduct the discussion? People put the questions here in chat, and I'll read it to you.
Well, I mean, they can ask their own question themselves if they want. Okay. And let me switch around how I look a bit so that you can see me a bit bigger. And I will actually, let's see, I'm going to switch my, just going to switch my zoom around here a bit. And yeah, no, I mean, if they're there, I would love for them to say the question themselves. But if they're if
All
you
right,
want to reach
I
in
have
chat, we can
already
also do that.
some people that registered here. So Vander, please, thank you for being here. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Professor, how are you doing? Are you fine, Anderson?
Fine.
And nice to meet you, Brad.
Good. Yeah, I don't see you. Are you not visible? Okay, you're just.
I think I am visible, or
Okay,
am I
maybe.
not?
Am
Yeah,
I
you're
still spotlight?
visible. Yep.
Am
you're
I still
visible.
spotlighted? Because
Yeah, I'll take you out of the spotlight, Brad.
yeah, take me out of the spotlight, and then we'll see who's talking. Great, go ahead.
Now you see me.
Not yet.
Hi, Mr. Brad, how are you doing? Thanks for the talk and all the time that you spent with us. One thing that you told that kept my mind was the thing that we're using the small cars for the last mile. And I was working with Professor Leonardo Montec here in Unicamp, okay? And one problem that we got about was how to make more secure decisions in cases of a untrained scenario. Let's say that, you know, an alien jumps in front of your car and you're not using a LiDAR. So we're trying to create some sort of a model using reinforcement learning and trying to bring some sort of explainability to the decision the car made in a scenario of danger, given it was not trained to do that. Have you heard anything or any research about that? Are the cars today had some sort of explainability model for them? Is there any way for me to look for that? In this particular case, in the small cars.
Well, by and large, no, most people are not attempting to build explainable if they're using neural networks. Now, not everyone is, very few people are using a pure neural network approach. Most people are using hybrids of neural networks and other algorithm styles. And when they're using the neural networks, though, their main priority is to get it to the level they want to get it to, and they'll worry about explainability later. Now, it is true that European law actually may require explainability of certain systems, which would possibly add some complexity to this. Although I've often asked this question, say you had two systems, and one was a black box, and one was explainable, but the explainable one ran over twice as many people. Which one should you deploy? Well, you like the explanation when it runs over your grandmother, yes, I suppose, but you'd rather it didn't run over your grandmother. And so obviously, if we can build an explainable system that is just as reliable as the non-explainable techniques, then I could see people want to do it, although it costs something. Many of the explanations that come from AI explainability are not very meaningful explanations. They may tell you that, okay, these neurons fired wrong and maybe it's a little more training, but they often don't give you an actionable result. And so I'm a little skeptical about it, and I don't think that too many people are focusing. I mean, I shouldn't say that they're not interested in understanding how their systems work. They are very interested in understanding how they work, in particular Waymo. Now, Google, as you probably know, is really the world's leader in neural networks. Guys like Jeff Hinton, the DeepMind crew all work for Google, and their expertise is available to Waymo. And they have built something that's, I think, a lot more sophisticated than the people who are attempting to do pure end-to-end neural network approaches. And there are some people who are literally trying to put pixels into a neural network and get steering commands out the other end. The Waymo definitely does not do that. They use neural networks to basically break down what they're seeing with their cameras into all sorts of components that they can then parameterize, and then they can do additional levels of understanding on top of that. So that they really, so that's much more explainable. But I think it's largely because they also want to be able to know they're developing it well and know that it's safe.
Very good. Thank you. Professor Marcos from PUC Rio.
By the way, this crowd maybe is more technical than I anticipated, if that's the question we're getting. So I should have put more technical in the talk, but we'll get into it now.
Okay.
Professor Brad, so thank you very much for this amazing talk. It was very interesting. I don't work directly with electric cars or with self-driving cars, but I have a question regarding the social aspects of the driving. So I identified every country, every society has culture of driving. So how do you see, putting some electric car, which is built by a tech company in the US, and then putting it to drive in the chaotic traffic of Sao Paulo or of India. So every country has its culture. And you mentioned that the cars cannot understand what people are doing, but actually part of the culture is making maybe putting the arm outside and just asking to turn the lane. So how do you see this approach to gradually putting self-driving cars into a society which is not used to this?
So yes, every country and every city is different, and everyone knows that. And as I said, they won't deploy, globally all at once. Well, I mean, Tesla hopes to, but most of the teams don't hope to do that. Well, or don't expect they'll do that. So yes, you typically are going to come into a town and you're going to learn its differences, and you're going to obviously learn its different laws, and you're going to learn its cultural differences, and you're going to test the vehicles with human beings in them to make sure they don't make mistakes for a certain amount of time. But there's a lot of evidence that the difference between cities is not in any way intractable. It's relatively small. Certainly, I mean, I personally thought it was insane that the first time I went to Japan, they happily rented me a car, and I had to drive on the other side of the road for the first time in my life, and I had to drive in these very, very narrow streets, and the signs were all in a language I couldn't read, and what do you know, I didn't hit anybody, I think. So now I am a full human intelligence, but even the dumbest of humans is still trusted to do that, and it's really not. It's not as big a delta as you're imagining. And so it's not going to happen in a minute, but it's certainly something that you can do in a month. And as an example of that, Mobileye, the company in Israel, which developed their car in Tel Aviv, when they wanted to deploy in Germany, they sent 2 cars. This was during the pandemic, so they couldn't really move around easily. But they shipped 2 cars to Munich. They had 2 non-technical employees in Munich who took those cars and drove them around Munich and fed the data back to their servers in Israel. And they did that for 2 weeks. And then they were ready to drive in Munich. Now, yes, Germany is one of the more ordered countries in the world. That's certainly true. But it's quite different from Israel. And they believe they can do that again and again. That's their claim. And I think, as you say, Sao Paulo might be one of the more extreme places in the world. The traffic is some of the worst in the world. And, Brazilians have their own weird habits, but Israelis have their own weird habits too. And so I believe it won't be instantaneous, but this problem will be solved.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Camila?
Hello, Professor Templeton. Nice to meet you. Thank you for the great talk. And I'd like to do a parallel with the flying autonomous vehicles. Here in Brazil, we also have a company that's developing a program with this product. It's Embraer, and they have already sold 100 units. Even it is not finished yet, but it will be a product in a very short time. And they are also developing a logistics system to integrate these autonomous flying vehicles in cities, along with the vehicle itself. And I have 3 questions about this. I've heard from the Embraer engineers that the technology to make autonomous flying has been known for decades, but it couldn't be completely implemented because of some of the same problems for autonomous car, like the proving safety. And the biggest problem was how to legalize and deal with legal problems about accidents, for example. I'd like to know if the technology for autonomous car is also completely known for some time, and if the biggest problem is the legal issue, and how do the companies deal with this problem? Do we have some perspective for the path that we'll be following about this question?
Yeah, no, it's not a simple question, of course, and many people actually believe that the problem will be easier in the air because driving is actually a much more complex task than flying.
Yes.
Even if, as they expect to, you start putting the aircraft much closer together, because you don't have to put them nearly as close together as you do the cars on the road. So you've got to make your vehicle. These are vehicles. The Embraer is a I've not flown in their VTOL aircraft. I've flown in their regional jets many times, but their design is kind of like a big helicopter with lots of big rotors, a little similar to the Bell one, right? I think, so it's going to be very maneuverable. I mean, it could like literally make a left turn in the air. A sharp corner left turn, which is something that a regular aircraft cannot do, which gives you a lot more flexibility about how you route them and so on. So the funny thing was that when self-driving cars started first arriving on the scene, and everyone wondered, are they going to be legal? What are you going to have to do to get them on the road? Well, at Google, we went through all the laws and we discovered that nobody had thought to write a law saying no robots. Now, that's just because they didn't think of it. Obviously, later they would think about it. So Google immediately went to some of the state legislatures, starting in Nevada and later California and a few others, and said, why don't we write a law about how to test these? And they said, great, yeah, we'll do that. They were eager to do so. Right? They were attracted to the idea that their place could become the place where this technology is developed. Because if the car industry is going to be overdone, and so it won't be Detroit anymore, it won't be Yokohama, it'll be other places that are the capitals of new car industry. Well, everyone wants to be that new capital, and so they were very eager to help, and so they wrote those laws. In fact, the state of Florida, there's a senator there who he wrote a law on his own. Nobody even asked him to make the cars legal in Florida and make it clear what to do. And so it's not as smooth now as it was. But nonetheless, the countries remain eager and they want to be the place where this is developed. China wants to be the place. Europeans are actually a little slower on the regulatory aspect. They're more cautious with their regulations, and that is delaying progress in Europe compared to the United States and compared to China. So when it comes to flying, one of the biggest issues actually is going to be noise. Will people accept the noise of them taking off near to them? So for now, most people just imagine there will be special vertiports, as they call them, on top of buildings or at docks on the side of the water and that sort of thing. And that's where they'll fly from. There are still, by the way, technical issues as well about how much energy you can put in batteries. But likewise, I think that you will see jurisdictions competing. You will see governments saying, oh, we want our city, our country to be the first place with this. And this has happened in Singapore, for example. It's happened in the United Arab Emirates, where they've been making deals already with some of the companies that are building these vehicles to get them deployed there as quickly as possible.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Professor Templeton. I have one more question.
Okay, Camila, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Professor, would be also needed to think of a logistic system to integrate autonomous vehicles in the normal traffic to make all of this work, or the products developed nowadays don't need this kind of solution?
That's right. I mean, the first car to go out on the road, it just has to drive on the road with everybody else. It can't. You really can't demand the world change for you. You have to adapt to the world. You adapt your software to drive on the road you're given. People imagine, oh, why we could change the rules of the road, and we will in time. And when we changed the rules for cars as they had changed, we used to not even have highways, and we had a lot of other things, and we eventually made it not allowed to cross the street except at a crosswalk, although this is enforced differently in different parts of the world. So we will adapt rules in the future, but for now they will be driving mixed with other people, and they will be doing that for many decades to come. We're not going to be taking the keys away from the human drivers, except maybe you might see some places saying, okay, maybe in the downtown core, maybe these are so good now that we don't want people driving right in the downtown, but they'll still drive on the outside. There may be some countries or cities that want to do that sooner than others, but the important thing is the people building the cars won't depend on that. They're not going to make a car that can only drive in a special zone. That's sort of old thinking. There were people in the 90s who wanted to do that because they thought the problem was too hard. They said, oh, there's no way we could drive on a road with other cars, so we'll have to wait until we're given a special road of our own. But today, well, almost no one thinks that. Today, everyone says, we got to drive on the road we're given. And that's the smart approach, because software development goes at a much faster pace than legal innovation and infrastructure change. Infrastructure change takes decades. Software change takes minutes.
Very good point. Carlos Azevedo, whom I already thank for making this talk possible. Thank you, Carlos. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you, Brad, for the excellent talk. My question is more into the fleet optimization and traffic optimization aspects of deploying autonomous vehicles at scale. I'm wondering if we have a situation that each car individually tries to optimize its behavior locally, not necessarily that will yield the best possible outcome for the collective of passengers and the traffic. So my question is, how do you see which technology evolutions are necessary for us to get closer to the global optimum? So do we need vehicle-to-vehicle communication or a global software like orchestrating groups of vehicles or anything like that? How do you see the future for traffic optimization?
No, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, which many people talk about, is a terrible idea. It presents a computer security risk, and we do not want any chance of computer intrusion. We'll never get no chance, but nobody has ever built a complex system that talks to lots of other devices and remains secure. It's just, I mean, other than the military, and that's when you have guns. And you can shoot the people who are trying to break into your computer. But otherwise, it would be a bad idea. Now, the cars will communicate. They'll communicate with their headquarters. You know, obviously, you have to tell them, I need to be picked up at this corner. And so you need to convey that to the car. And you will convey other things as well. But no, it turns out there are ways, I believe, that to make them not be selfish. You've sort of worried they'll be a little bit selfish and look after their own interests the way that people do when people drive, of course. And the reason is that these will be operated in fleets. And there will, even the privately owned ones, there will not be 5,000 manufacturers. There will be, in one city, maybe 20 companies who make a different type of self-driving car. Some of them might be taxi fleets and some of them might be owned by private people, but there are only so many car companies in the world that would operate in your city. And so if the cars are not acting in a good way, a social way, a polite way, you can get those 20 people in a room and you can say, we don't like what your car's doing. And the difference between people and robots is that once you see one robot making a mistake, you fix it, and all the robots now have the mistake fixed, right? With people, you give someone a ticket for making a bad lane change. It doesn't stop other people from making the bad lane change. With robots, you give them one ticket for the bad lane change, and immediately none of them will ever do that again. So I think you'll actually see them acting in they won't disobey the law, because if they disobey the law, the company gets punished, right? Not just some random guy. And so companies, now it's not that companies never break the law, of course they do, but it's a bigger deal and there are different ways of dealing with it. I have actually devised a system which would even force individuals. Have you studied any game theory in your program? Okay, so you know about the iterated prisoner's dilemma. It's the most famous problem in game theory.
Yes. And
you know that in the iterated prisoner's dilemma, the winning strategy is something called tit for tat. And with tit for tat, it means that if somebody is bad to you, you remember that, and then you are bad for everyone. All of your friends are bad to them from now on. And so it becomes a very big mistake for them to have ever defected, as it's called. So what will happen is that if I have a fleet of cars out there and you cut me off because you are a rude driver, and I have your license plate, and I say to all my friends, I got 10,000 other cars around the city. This guy, he's an asshole. All right. Don't ever let him in. Don't ever be nice to him. Well, you're going to see that it's a big penalty if you even cut off one of these cars. You're going to be scared to cut them off because you know that their 10,000 friends will punish you. And so I think we could even put the humans and make them polite, but the robots will definitely be polite.
Very good point. And one comment here is that reinforcement learning for human drivers not always work, right? Even the person that gets a ticket, this person will commit the same thing again, and probably that won't happen with robots.
How did you find out about me?
Very good. Igor?
Hello, Professor Brad. I'm really, first, thanks for the presentation you have given us. I'm a simple freshman in computer science, so I'm still learning about lots of things. So I'm really happy that you gave us a very, how do I say, broad explanation about it. But I have two questions.
That's okay. I have a degree in computer science and I'm still simple. So.
Thanks. So I had two questions. And the first one is that does making a self-driving car equals having what people usually call general artificial intelligence, something like that, like an artificial intelligence that can think and act like a human being would? So does making a self-driving car equals having something like that? Or like you can develop a self-driving car like without having something like that? That is the first question. And the second one is a question that people usually ask about really any technology, because how do you think we can go about getting people used to that idea of cars driving themselves? Because many people are still not connected to technology nowadays. So suppose my grandmother learned to drive from her parents. She won't believe if I tell her that a car can drive itself. So inequality is a really, how do I say, a really big problem towards that goal of having people getting used to that idea. Thanks.
So I'm pretty sure, most people are pretty sure you don't need to get a full general intelligence in order to drive. Many people would point out that in the old days when we all used horses, it was well known that if you got drunk at the bar, they could put you on your horse and the horse would just take you home, even though you were asleep on the horse. So maybe we need artificial horse intelligence, but I don't even think we need that. And the reality is, as I say, while not being so far as to say this is a solved problem, people like Waymo have got it working on these more simple suburban streets and with nothing even close to a general intelligence. So I mean, obviously you can't say for sure you do it without general intelligence until the day that everyone is riding in it every day, but this certainly doesn't look that way. Now, how do you get people to accept it? Well, some people won't. And there are a few technologies that there's some people who still don't have a cell phone and maybe even some people who don't have a television. But generally, people are pretty accepting of technologies. In fact, once they sort of use it once, they actually get too confident in it. That's become the thing I've seen when we've done experiments on bringing people into these cars, that they trust them more than the people building them trust them, because it worked once, so it probably works all the time. That's how human beings kind of think. To give you an example, people were scared of elevators 100 years ago when we first started getting elevators in the buildings. And today, if you're walking down your building and you want to catch the elevator, but it's closing, how do you stop the elevator from leaving? You stick your arm in the jaws of the robot, right? That's how much we trust it now. In fact, if you have small children with you, you have them run up ahead and put their arm in the jaws of the robot. So we adapt. People got pretty used to that pretty quickly. And it's, of course, an elevator is a self-driving car, but it's just in a shaft.
Just a quick comment, because I think the idea that you talk about the elevator is really a good example of that. I can think how people in the past were scared of elevators, like because you are kept in a box, like isolated from the world. So people are probably very scared of that, but nowadays they have accepted it. So maybe there's not that much of a problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Igor. Last two questions, Alexandre and then Pedro. Alexandre, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Brad, for the talk. My question is regarding to privacy, because you had mentioned about security, that cars are not connected because you try to prevent this kind of problems. But does the industry has a specific concern about security? How is it being treated in the development of these new technologies? Is it a specific concern or more general? Because okay, if you think that okay, you're being monitored with your mobile phone, but still you can have your own car that if you're not using your mobile, you're by yourself. But in this autonomous car, it seems that you're always connected, but not connected. You connect somehow, but not among all cars. So is it how is being treated this issue of privacy?
Yeah, I'm with you in saying I'm not sure they are giving it as much attention as they should, which is not saying they're giving it no attention, but they're not putting it as high on the priority stack as I think they'll eventually need to. Now, there are two things we speak about here. One is security, which is, is the car going to be able to be broken into and taken over for ransomware or, any other kind of computer attack, which I do think people need to care a great deal about. There are many companies attempting to sell security tools to help with this because they know it will be a big business. I'm of the belief, though, as I said, that the cars should not be communicating at all or as little as possible. You teach a computer the same thing you teach your children: do not talk to strangers. Yeah. Not everyone is of that mind yet. However, when you get to privacy, then they're definitely not doing very much about it, and it is a concern for me. Even, for example, the move to Uber. Do you have Uber in Brazil, or you have something like
Yes.
it?
Yes,
we do have.
So, of course, with Uber, you always travel with a credit card, and it's always recorded and so on. And this is already very different from the old way when there was a taxi and you put out your arm and you handed over some cash, and really nobody knows where you went or no logger where you went. Most of those taxis did have GPS logging in them starting about 20 years ago. So they did know where the taxis went. And there was a record that some taxi went from your house to your office, and you could probably guess that was you. But otherwise, there was no information recorded. And already with Uber, we've switched to a world with all of our trips that way being recorded. And if we're not very careful, we'll do the same thing. In fact, it's even worse. When you have a self-driving car, there's no driver in the car to keep you well behaved, so that if if you try and damage it or something like that, they have to get you afterwards. So that means they need to have a record of who you were, so that when the next guy gets in the car and they see that someone has thrown up all over the seat, no driver saw that. So then they want to charge you the money for cleaning the car, so they have to know who you are to charge you the money, or they have to have a bond. But nobody's even thinking about this problem or whether to have a bond. So we're going to need to try and define some principles about when this information can be stored and how soon it should be erased. So they need to know who I am just to make sure the car is clean and I didn't damage it. But after they're sure of that, maybe they don't need to remember what trip they took me on. And I think we should push for this sort of approach.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. Pedro?
Thanks, Professor Brad. My question is kind of the inverse of Igor's question regarding general intelligence, because you have explained that the technology used for autonomous driving is not just put a network there and run it and give the data and that's it. It has many human considerations, let's say. And as we have more and more cars, autonomous cars in the street, can we expect kind of decrease in the need for machine learning in general, because everything is going autonomous, everything can get more simplified. That's one consideration.
I mean, you're indulging in a fantasy many people indulge in, which is, imagining how it's like when all the cars are now autonomous. And I think that day is very far away. So it's fun to imagine. There's people who've imagined even taking out the traffic lights because the cars will just figure out how to get to the intersection, or they'll coordinate a little bit. But this is not really happening for a long time. I don't think politically it would be possible to tell everybody, no, you may never drive again. And I think that by the time it did happen, our computing capabilities and our AI capabilities were going to be so advanced that no one would say, oh, we should take this out now. I mean, there wouldn't be a reason to take it out. And it'll always be the case that unless you want to put walls around the roads, that somebody could walk out into the street. It'll always be the case that someone are we going to tell the bicycles they cannot go on the roads? No. So someone could be riding a bicycle. You're going to need the best tools you can to track the bicycle, predict where the bicycle is going to go, and make sure you never hit the bicycle or the pedestrian. So even if we don't let people drive their cars, in the United States, 20% of the car crashes are with deer. So, and nobody has yet got the deer to wear transponders. They keep trying to take them off. So, we're not going to get the deer, the animals to wear transponders. We're not going to get the pedestrians to do so. So no, you will have to, at all times, be as aware as you possibly can be of the environment around you and react to it.
All right, if I can complement then, in this case, we can expect those systems to get more and more complex and through time, less explainable, let's say, through time.
Well, you're assuming, though, that there isn't more sophisticated explainability in the future, too. It could be that, many people researching explainability are looking for ways to automate explainability, and they have neural networks or AIs that attempt to understand other neural networks. And I don't know where that research is going to go and whether it's going to be successful. But if there is a lot of desire for it, I think it could be. It could be that you could have a way of building a sufficiently powerful system that you have better understanding of, or at least that your tools have better understanding, even if you, the human, don't have better understanding.
Very good, Brad. One final question from myself. You mentioned several possible impacts that we're going to have in the cities with this full transformation of the way that we go from point A to point B. Have you thought about the other possible transformations, like when you have a series of these robots on the streets, you can collect a lot of data that right now we don't have. And you could use this data for other things, like improving the cities itself. Like one simple thing would be collecting holes that you found during the.
All these things already happen.
All of these things are already happening. Can you comment on
Yes.
some of these things that have been researched?
Well, for example, I mentioned Mobileye, which is an Israeli company which is now owned by Intel. They immediately saw Mobileye was a company that put cameras into cars for driver assist, and they've switched to one to be about self-driving. Well, they still, though, are the biggest provider of these cars, and they realized that there's something like 17 million cars with Mobileye cameras driving around the world, and every city is full of them. And so they quickly started a business line selling cities information about what they learn when the cars drive around, and they tell them where the potholes are, and they tell them where they even have to tell people where all the wires are and where the construction work is, and where the lanes aren't painted very well, and where the pedestrians are well behaved and where they're not well behaved, and what intersections are dangerous and where are they seeing accidents. One of my students from Singularity University, he has a company called Nexar, which makes dash cams, and he's doing the same with people's dash cams, selling the data of what they learn.
Very good point. So once again, Professor Brad, thank you very much for your time discussing these excellent points with us. And also thank you to the audience that made excellent questions. I apologize for not being able to ask all of them. I needed to select, but it was a very nice discussion. Thank you, Carlos, for making this possible. And Brad, it was awesome. Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you as well. And it was great to be here. It's a little hard to travel to Brazil right now, but I do hope to get a chance to go there. Actually, the last place I traveled, a long trip before, well, no, second last place was to Chile. So I do like to get down to South America. I missed 2 eclipses of the sun that were going to take place in Chile and Argentina. There will be one again in Brazil. I'll probably get there for that, if nothing else. Let me ask you though, was it useful to people for me to put up the Portuguese? Did that help anybody, or is it too slow or too low quality to be useful?
So you can, folks, you can clap if you use it, or put like a thumbs up if you use it, the translation, just as a feedback. I think that 4 said
okay.
yes.
Well, it sounded like most of the students here had excellent command of English, and so it wasn't as necessary. But I sometimes speak to, particularly in Asia, I speak to audiences where getting something written is very useful for them. So
Right.
That's good. Anyway, it's great to see you. And you have, well, it's evening there for you, and there's still a bit of my day left here in California. But you have the great rest of your day.
Have a nice day ahead. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.